Hey Frank.
Hey Derek, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm trying to show my headphones. Hold on. Yes, I'm outside and it's gonna be more a pain in the butt if I don't connect you to my headphones.
Looks nice there.
Oh, it's beautiful out here. It's like 60 degrees and sunny. Aren't you in California?
No, I was born in California. I'm up in Washington now. It's
Oh,
like,
okay.
I don't know, 31 degrees or something.
Really? It's that cold?
Yeah, we just had a foot of snow
Oh, geez.
just melting off now. So, yeah.
Hold on, my headphones are taking a second to connect to my computer for some reason.
So I watched those gripsters up in Canada and Russia, and I'm just like, oh my God. They're out there and, -10 or whatever. I just can't believe that. I could not deal with
Yeah, it's like I work out in my garage in the morning sometimes and it's like 30 or 40 degrees and I'm freezing my ass off. I need a space heater for my garage just for the mornings here. But yeah, I could not work out in -10. Like, there's an old grip guy. I don't know if you know Jason Steves, if you've heard of him. I don't think he does too much grip now. He was more my era, but yeah, he's in Canada and he's posting like these screenshots like -40. He's in like Alberta, so it's just stupid cold. Like I fucking couldn't. I think he has an indoor like basement gym, but still, I fucking couldn't.
Yeah, I see a guy like dig out his squat rack out of the snow and then start working out. I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, come on. This is just nuts.
Can you see me okay? Am I too like front lit or is it okay?
No, you're good.
All right,
Yes,
cool.
you're great. So for people that don't know who you are, tell everybody about yourself a little bit.
So my name is Derek Graybill. I've been doing grip oh since I was 14. So would that be 2006? Is when I started. I started under the tutelage of Aaron Corcoran, Acorn on Gripboard, one of the greatest grip guys of that era, and still probably one of the best of all time. Yeah, started at a young age, got the grip bug early, kind of drifted away for a little while. I didn't really do much grip between like 21 and 26-ish. I was doing powerlifting, strongman, kind of other things, and arm wrestling, other things in strength that just kind of caught my interest, and then fell back into bending, partially because of the encouragement of my wife, and then was my girlfriend slash fiance, and also just quarantine was part of the reason too. But that's why it's like intensified, but started before quarantine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, now I
Um,
do mostly bending, obviously, but I don't know what else you want me to go into. I mean, I could talk about myself for forever, but I don't know what all to say. I'm not great at talking about myself, to be honest.
are you mainly focusing on double overhand with bending now?
Actually, right now I'm branching off more into like braced, just
Okay.
because double overhand has caused me some injuries, and um, but I still am going to go back to it relatively soon. I've just been having some elbow issues with it, so I'm doing more braced and double under at the moment when I can do bending. But generally, my focus has been double over. I don't do a ton of other grip stuff, or haven't since I got back into it. Um, yeah, I'm chasing a few brace goals though at the moment, as well as some double over goals. So yeah.
What are your current goals with those?
Braced, chasing the Wonder Bar just because it seems like a fun one. And even Don hasn't done it yet, although I'm probably a little further away than Don is, to be honest. But it just seems like a fun one to chase because I really like the mid bar stuff. That's 3/8 by 2 by 30 inches, originally done by, is it Chris Wondershook or something? I forget the guy's name. It's only been done by a handful of people. I also want to see how short I can go on a Goliath. Just the long stuff right now is a little awkward for me, and same with the 3/4 stuff. I like to see how short I can go. Um, there haven't been too many people that have done like sub 3 foot 3/4, and there's only one guy that's done it under 30 inches. So I'd really like to be the second person to hit a 3/4 bar sub 30 inches. And Goliath sub 40 would be cool. I've done a 46 a while back, but I haven't really messed around much lately. I'm trying to get back that like longer bar strength because it's just a little awkward for me with being out of work. I mean, I did my first braced workout on what was it, Monday? My first brace workout in like 2.5 years. Did the two was it 3/8 by 2 by 37 1/4 or something. It was a weird length. It's on my YouTube channel. Did a 3/8 by 40 relatively easily after that long off. So yeah, we'll see how short I can cut some of those things down. And I want to get back into 5/8 too and hit that sub 20 because I never got there. I got to like 22 at my best, I think, or 21, something like that. Yeah, those are a handful of my brace goals. I'm not too good at that short stuff like Don does. Like I just don't have that leg power. I'd be nice to try to, but I'm better at like the mid and long bar stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, Don's got some pretty stout short brace pins I've seen.
Oh my goodness, I don't even want to try to like compete with him on that stuff because I'm just not even close. And like I don't know if I've mentioned this on a podcast before with like Cody or anything, but back in my day, like the extent to which short stuff is done brace didn't even exist. Like no one touched brace stuff sub 8 inches. It wasn't even a thing. No one contemplated doing that. So when I came back and saw Don doing, 6-inch, 4-inch stuff brace, it was just so foreign to me. I do not have that kind of leg power. Like in my day, short stuff was started generally over the thigh, like just a little bit, and then you would move it in between your legs. You didn't do stuff just like straight in between your legs. So that's I don't know if that's taking after an older time strongman that used to do it that way. I don't really know the history of like super short stuff. Sorry if my dog's a little loud and annoying, but yeah, it's wild that he does stuff like that. Oh, and then double overhand goal is still 12.9. I mean, I've gotten so damn close to that goal a handful of times, and injuries and stuff just keep setting me back. I've just been riddled with injuries, unfortunately, for the last 6 months. So I'm trying to get healthy and get back to a serious attempt at that. It seems like every time I come close, like something else pops up and is nagging me. So a few other goals, but obviously that's the number one right now, just being the second person to start on the 12.9 goal and then start cutting it down.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, that goal is a monster. Absolutely.
It's a beast.
Mess with it. Yeah.
Yeah, the crush on that thing is just it's a monstrosity. I mean, I can kink that thing pretty quickly, but then when it gets down like 3 inches and thereunder, it just becomes a freaking spring. Anyway.
That actually brings me into the first of the fan questions. Someone said they're kind of new to double overhand bending and they get a lot of pressure in their elbows when they go for big bends. Is that pretty normal?
I think to some extent. Sorry, can you hear him really badly? Is it?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
But,
I want to make sure he's not bothering anybody too much. Yeah, I think elbow pressure is somewhat normal. I mean, that's why I've had some injuries, but that also is probably more a form problem, where they're driving at a bad angle because you shouldn't be feeling actual pressure. I mean, ultimately, as Adam said, it is a lot of elbow drive. That's double overhand bending. I don't really hate Adam as much as everyone makes that to me, but I just like to have to poke fun. Yeah, you shouldn't be having like elbow pressure or elbow pain per se. If you are, it's probably a form problem that needs to be tweaked. Generally, you want to have your elbows pointing outward. A lot of people have them pointing down when they're bending. You want to have them pointed about 6 feet-ish out in front of you at like I'd say pointing out 45 to 60 degrees. So if you're having a lot of pressure or pain, it's probably something that you need to work on and watch some better benders or sign up for, my steel bending course, Bending Academy, and get some pointers, because probably something a little bit off. It's definitely common and can be a thing with newer benders, obviously.
Yeah, that was one of my problems when I first started. Was I was trying to bend down, and a lot of it is almost all the bending videos you see online, they're facing straight toward the camera. So it's when you see a video where they're slightly off that you finally realize, oh, they're pushing their elbows outward, and then you kind of get that form fix. So
yeah, that's a big difference. And when you're new, and obviously a lot of people are starting in quarantine where they've had no experience training with other benders. As I said, I was very, very fortunate that I started training with Aaron. I've trained with Paul Knight. I've trained with Eric Milfeld. I mean, just all sorts of greats with bending. So I've had a lot of coaching early to get my form right. But a lot of people who haven't had that and just kind of watching benders on their YouTube or whatever, it's a lot harder to get those finer points down. And I've noticed that a lot with some of the people I've been training. Like those little things like that make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. that little adjustment helped me just go from really struggling with the red to just melting it without feeling like I've used more than 70% effort.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, little things like that make a huge difference in such a technique-based sport.
What's been your most difficult bend you've accomplished?
You know, a lot of people say the 10.9 is harder than the G8, but for me, the 6-inch G8, big G8, so 5/16 by 6, grade 8, was probably the hardest bend I've finished in double overhand, especially. That thing just took me a couple of attempts, and the one I finally finished, I mean, the end of it was just utter like exhilaration because I had been failing that thing like 2 or 3 times, and finally just took that thing down. So I'd say that was probably the hardest bend I've completed.
Awesome. What's the thickest bar you've bent? Doesn't say any manner of which bending, so I guess braced and non-braced, I guess.
Yeah, double over. Well, the SAR is 25/64. I don't think I've done anything bigger than that. I keep meaning to order Emperor stock, which is 13/32, but I haven't actually done so. Yeah, that's the thickest bar I've actually finished. I've moved some 3/8 square and some other big like crazy shit. I think it's 12L14, but I'm not honestly positive the type of steel it is. So I've kinked some like really big stuff, and like I've played around with 3/8 square hot rolled, but I haven't actually finished a piece of that. So biggest piece I've finished is 25/64 cold rolled. Braced, I mean, there's so many different ways to go with that. Obviously 3/4 can be one of the widest round. I've tried 3/4 square and just haven't finished it. Haven't really moved it too much, to be honest. But and then flat, I mean, I've done, like I said, 46-inch Goliath, 3/8 by 2, 37.3 was a recent bend. I haven't really messed with that stock before now, so I'm sure I can go shorter, but I haven't yet. And I want to try like the 3/8 by 2.5 and some stuff like that, but I just need to get back to the steel yard and buy some even bigger stuff. But yeah, with brace, there's so many different ways to go with that, so I don't know how to answer that directly. What was that?
So that's wide, 2.5. That's getting crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I saw obviously Don do it. For some reason, like for me, the 3/8 by 2 feels way more comfortable than the 1/2 by 1.5. I don't know if it's just the size or just the, I don't know, metal density, but it feels more comfortable. So I think 3/8 by 2.5 might actually be a relatively comfortable size, but we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, it's not easy by any means at 48. If Don's struggling with it, I'm not sure it's going to be an easy bend, but I think it's something that's definitely doable.
Okay. And I don't know much about this bend, but someone asked, have you done the 6.5 SS Aaron's bend?
Oh, so that'd be a 6.5-inch stainless square, which is 5/16 square, 6.5, 303 stainless. I am honestly starting to be terrified of doing stainless square. I don't think I'm going to ever do that bend. I've tried it a couple of times and gotten pretty darn close, but my last few attempts at stainless square have snapped at my neck. So as much as I really want that bend, it actually was one of my biggest goals because Aaron's the only one that's done it, and it's a big bend. I'm not sure if I want to attempt that steel at stock anymore, just because I think I've had 3 stainless steel square snaps in a row, all at my neck.
That's crazy.
So the answer is no, and it might forever be no, but we'll see. Maybe I'll try it at some point in the future.
That's actually the next question is right on that. What metal to stay away from? Are there any other ones?
So that's obviously a big one. I don't think many people bend the 911 bolts anymore, but those ones can be scary. I remember back in the day, people used to do 1/4x6 F911 bolts, which is it's like a grade 9. They tend to be harder than a 12.9 inch by inch, if I remember correctly, or at least like along the same spectrum. But back in that day, no one did 12.9, so I'm not positive. But I know a couple people snapped those in the center. People have been having issues with like the grade 8s and stuff snapping at the threads. I wrap my bolts far enough in that I've never had an issue with something snapping at the threads. But if you're someone who only wraps at 1 1/4 or 1.5, then the big G8s can be kind of scary too. There's different thread types on those, and I'm not sophisticated enough to remember the differences off the top of my head, but that's something to play around with because there's 18 thread count, and like 24 thread count, I think. So if you're having that problem, maybe try the other thread count and see if it's any better. So those are the two big ones, are like F911 bolts and stainless square. There's I mean, otherwise just stay into like generally normal steel. I have some random steel that I found in my pile, and I thought it was 5/16 cold, and I cut a piece of it. And then I bent it, and it was way hard, and it snapped again at my neck. So I've been having some bad luck lately. This is a few weeks ago. And then I cowled it, and it was like 21/64, and like it's a really weird grayish steel. So just stick with like relatively normal types of steel. Don't go too far outside of the box would be my advice in general with that. Like stick to 1018, 12L14, which if you don't know much about that, join the Bending Academy. I'll teach you all about steel progression. Stainless, obviously, 304 or 303. Drill rods are safe, O1, W1. What else? Bolts are generally safe, obviously. Pretty much any type besides, again, F911s are a little scary. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Okay.
And yeah, stainless quarter square I've never had a problem with. For some reason, 5/16 square just seems to be a little more brittle and a little more scary. I remember Aaron breaking a piece or two as well. And I've heard, I think, who was it? Oh, Dell, I think, said that he had snapped a piece of that too on my Dell Mark Carter on one of my comments. So I think like when you get into bigger stainless square, it just needs to be stayed away from. Like I think it's just not the safest thing to bend.
Yeah, that's crazy. You can impale yourself or something. That's just, that's
Oh yeah. Yeah, it breaks super sharp too. I've had them break with like a shard. I could probably find a piece if you want me to, but like a long ass shard like this, like man, if that thing had been bent a little differently, it could have, cut my throat open.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's the strangest metal you've put your hands on? I guess for bending.
Yeah, of course. Well, one is that one I just talked about. I don't even know what the heck that thing was, but it like bent super wide and snapped. I don't even know where I would have gotten that. But stuff I've actually bent in a somewhat regular basis. I mean, brass is weird. I've done like the 3/8 hex brass, and that's a fun bend, but they're just super expensive right now with FBBC. Aluminum is also fun. I know Squeeze This was going to do a cert on that, but then he started snapping it. I never had any problem with it snapping. I don't know if I was using a different type way back in the day or what, but it can be a fun bend. But again, that's a little sketchy too, and probably one I'd recommend people staying away from. But it is kind of a fun bend because you get to bend like super wide diameters. I got up to like 1/2 inch by 7, I think was what I did way back in the day, and it wasn't too bad. But with people snapping it recently, I'd still say probably stay away from it. That's really the only wild stuff I've bent. Again, I don't recommend bending anything super weird because you don't know the risk of it snapping. That's why I tend to avoid buying unusual or different types of steel off of the steel suppliers, because I'm just like, I don't know if that's safe to bend. So yeah, I don't mess around with that stuff too much.
Okay. See, what brought you back into steel bending?
My wife encouraged me to get back into it, to be honest. This was November of 2019. I had sort of gotten back into it. I did some brace stuff before her and I got together, and that was in October of 2018 or September, whenever that was. And then I just kind of got away from it due to work. And I was working like 60 hours a week at that point. I worked in 9 to 8, 10 to 8 kind of hours. But then I was about to leave that job, and my wife was like, you should get back into bending. It's something you enjoy doing. Why don't you try it again? And just started up and had immediate success. So kept going.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question. Assuming that everything that Gaza put out was legit back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do you think made Gaza at that level? And it focuses on intensity. Do you think his intensity was higher than what most benders are at now? And do you think people are reaching that level of intensity, or what do you think could have made him at the level he was? Now, I saw some of his bends back in the day. I remember like him spraying bolts with WD-40 and just smashing them. And he did a lot of the black and white videos. And he was a very intense dude. And it seemed like he had the size to potentially put out that kind of power. So what do you think would have made him what he was?
I think intensity was definitely a huge thing. Like, I mean, I've talked about this on Cody's podcast too. That guy was just out of his fucking mind in the most complimentary way possible. I mean, again, if we assume that his stuff was legitimate, even if we assume most of it was legitimate, which I tend to be on that bandwagon, that at least up to the huge chain of all shinies was definitely legit, in my opinion. And some of the stuff beyond that, he stopped posting videos, and that was again after I left bending, so I don't know as much about the claims of like the 5" by 3/8 grade 5 and some of the things that are a little more out there, I guess. But I definitely believe up to the huge chain of all shinies was real, and I think it was just his intensity and mental fortitude. Like, he just did not accept failure as an option. He also had a tremendous background for grip related strength. He was a bricklayer, if I remember correctly, and just had a ton of background in like manual labor and hard labor jobs. So I think the combination of finger, hand, wrist strength from doing those kind of jobs and just his outrageous intensity and desire to be the absolute best is what made him the absolute best. Yeah, and personally, I have no doubts up to the huge chain of all shinies. And to be honest, like the gap between that and like the 5" big grade 5 isn't that huge from what I remember. I don't know if anyone's ever called a big G5. I'm really curious if they have, because it's on my list for long-term goals. So if someone has, hit me up, let me know what they're called at. But I don't think it's that much higher than a chain of all shinies, because if you think about it, shiny bastard usually cals around 520. Had some batches lower than that, some batches higher than that, and an edge in, which is again same dimensions, but grade 5 versus 303 stainless is about 560. So we're talking about a 10% difference. A big chain of all shinies is about 800 pounds. It's been caled. So, you're talking about 10% harder in theory to a Gaza bolt, which is the 3/8 by 7 grade 5. So yeah, I mean, given that it was a couple of years between his huge chain of all shinies and his claim of the 5" by 3/8 grade 5, it doesn't seem that outlandish if we, are basing our assumption that the huge chain of all shinies is real, that I'm of that group. Anyway, I digress, but I think all of it is within the realm of possibility that he did it, and I think it's just that he was already was so much better than everyone else. I mean, even when Aaron was bending, he didn't even touch a chain of all shinies. He was the only person to do an 11/32 stainless, which is not even close, with all due respect to Aaron, because obviously, like I said, one of the greats. So I think Gaza was just so far above and beyond everyone else because of his just ridiculous intensity. Yeah, I'm talking in circles, but that's where I'm at with that.
Okay. Who are you keeping an eye on in the bending world?
Josh is obviously on a roll that's out of his mind. Josh Goldthorpe, all the respect to him, in a year he's gone from bending. I mean, I remember watching his videos and cringing when he first started because his form really wasn't very good. No disrespect, Josh. It happens to everyone when they're brand new. And now he's, bent to 10.9, which I knew was a matter of time. So that's the easy answer. He is definitely one of the people that's chasing me, especially because I've been, no disrespect to him, I've been, struggling to do anything in the last 6 months just because of constant injury. So he's on my tail now. Obviously, Don is, like we talked about, one of the best race benders of all time. I really want to see Carl August Merckx get back into bending because his brace bending was just out of this world, and I haven't really seen him do much lately. And Jan, kind of the same thing. Jan's been battling injuries much like me, but I'm eager to see once he gets back healthy because he's been really close to that 10.9 several times. I know he can get there. Yeah, that's really who I'm keeping an eye on in terms of like the elite benders. I'm sure I'm forgetting other people too, but I don't mess with like the snapping much. Just not my forte, but more power to those who are really, really good at it. So I don't pay as much attention to like Dan, who's an elite snapper, and that kind of thing. But yeah. Oh, and Ruben, obviously, I don't watch too many of Ruben's videos. I need to, especially now that I'm getting into brace, because he's just out of his mind on brace steel. But Ruben is somebody I watch and keep an eye on too.
Okay, cool. So, we'll start getting into the actual longer interview here. So as you know, there's the hand dynamometer, which gives validity to research in grip strength, grip training, all of that stuff. But in steel bending, we really don't have a measurement. So there hasn't been a lot of research done on that. Of course, we have calibrated bars, but there's really not a scientific measurement for it. So the purpose of this interview is to demonstrate that there are mental aspects to steel bending. That's the primary purpose. Secondary purpose is to demonstrate that there are mental benefits to steel bending. So we're going to be using the descriptive phenomenological method in psychology by Amadeo Giorgi as our interview base. Okay, so for these questions, just answer, freely. Anything you say is valid. There's no answer that's, not good enough or whatever. So just, whatever pops in your mind, just throw that out. That's the best answer to give. So, okay, so are you ready?
Yeah.
Obviously, we're recording and this goes online. It's used for scientific research. So please describe for me in as much detail as possible your experience throughout a bend.
Well, I'm assuming we're talking about a maximum effort bend here. And you want to focus on the mental aspects, correct? Or are we talking about mental and physical and how they combine?
Yeah, all of that.
Okay. So as I am preparing for a bend after I've finished wrapping it, what I tend to do is just well, I mean, I'm a very intense bender. I've modeled myself after Aaron and Gaza because those were my role models when I started bending. A lot of people now are kind of the opposite feeling or how they bend, I guess. So when I go into a bend, I just get pretty much as psyched up as I can. Like my only focus is to finish that piece of steel. And I go in with the mindset that the biggest first hit I can get is going to be the most advantageous, which is why I've used things like ammonia to get myself, just as fired up and as ready to get that initial first hit as possible. So typically when I'm going into a bend, I, finish wrapping, I'll set it down for a minute, get my wits about me, drink, hydrate and get caffeine, and then take an ammonia hit, if it's something I'm going for a PR, and then just lay into the steel as hard as I can. What I'm really focusing on too is getting maximum air into my body. You and I think have talked on offline on like rebreathing in steel bending. So it's kind of like a squat. When you take a squat off the rack when you're doing something heavy, you're taking a big breath of air when you unrack, taking your step back and getting steady, and you're not letting go of that first air, but then you're breathing again and then descending. So it's similar in a bend, although there's no concentric piece of the bend like there is on a squat where you're, or is it eccentric? I'm blanking on the term now, but there's no downward where you're just loading up in a steel bend. So you're pretty much just breathing in and then hitting into that bar as hard as is possible. And I tend to do the same thing with all of my hits. That's why I tend to take breaks in between, because each hit, my goal is to have as much intensity into that hit and drive as hard as I can every time. So that's why you'll see me oftentimes take breaks in between hits, because I'm going for the most movement per hit. I don't do a ton of sitting there hitting on the bar. Isometrics are obviously important, but that's not my goal to finish a bend. I think that answers the question, hopefully.
What is your experience leading up to the bend? This could be days before, hours before, minutes, and specifically like a PR.
I don't do too much like days before. It's usually like the day of that I try to get my mind into the right place. Generally what I do is I'll watch videos of myself and other elite level benders for, the mental aspect of just seeing myself get hyped up in other videos, and B, sometimes just to critique and watch and notice the finer things that I'm doing right or wrong, or things that can be improved upon. I try to take lessons in bending from even like elite level powerlifters and strongmen, because I think it applies. Like I watch Julius Maddox a lot, who's one of the best benchers, or the best bencher in the world for raw. No one's really even close to him, and he will critique the hell out of his videos. He'll watch right after he hits a PR and go, okay, well, I should have been tighter on my upper back. I should have had my, this foot was a little off. This, I bounced off the chest too much, whatever. I'm not a high level bencher, as we've talked about, so I don't know exactly what, but I just think it's important to watch and learn, whether that be watching other vendors, especially if you're newer, or if you're of the higher level side, to watch yourself and find little things that you can be doing better. So I tend to do that before my bends, and then the morning of, it's just about getting myself in the right headspace as much as possible, or the day of, I guess. Not always bending in the morning, but that's generally what I do. So that's just eating a decent breakfast, getting a lot of caffeine. I'm a big proponent of like pre-workout / caffeine, and I tend to vary what I do with those. Like I'll vary sources from workout to workout. And then, when the bend comes up, like I just kind of talked about before, just getting myself in the right headspace, I try to push everything else out of my mind and focus on defeating that piece of steel.
Awesome. What is your experience after you complete the bend, and how do you deal with the adrenaline dump?
Man, that's tough. Usually after I finish a bend, the adrenaline tends to, I tend to carry it pretty well from bend to bend. That's why I tend to get full, or, again, back when I was still bending healthily, this has not been true the last 6 months, but I tend to get 3 to 4 to 5 PRs a workout, because I tend to keep that level of adrenaline very high. So I don't think I necessarily have an adrenaline dump after one particular bend, because usually I'm taking a couple of minutes to just collect myself. I'm sure that there is obviously some dump, but I'm taking a couple minutes to collect myself, breathing, because you tend to be out of breath after something maximum effort, especially if you're cutting yourself close to that 5-minute time limit and you're going all out in the last couple minutes. But then I just collect myself, cut the next piece of steel I want to bend, or I might have it pre-cut depending on what I knew about that workout, and go back in. In terms of after the workout itself, I'm usually destroyed, as a lot of people have talked about. There's a lot of mental aspect to bending, and there's a lot of I forget the terminology someone's used before, but just there's a lot of neuro connection there too. So generally after a workout, I'm pretty drained, and I'll have a good meal and get back into the rest of my day as much as I can. But sometimes I'll even like nap after a heavy workout, because I'm just so damn drained. But I don't tend to do a full dump of adrenaline until after a few bends.
Okay. How do your emotions come into play in your steel bending?
For the better and the worst, to be honest. I mean, if there's a big PR I've been working towards, and especially if there's something that I feel like I should have gotten, like that's how the 12.9 bolt has been to some extent. I'm very hard on myself. I think that's part of being one of the best in anything you do. Is I wish I wasn't that way, because sometimes it can be detrimental. But I'm very, very hard on myself, where if there's a bend I feel like I should have finished, I've gotten depressed, honestly, after a missed bend. But then the opposite is obviously true too, where after hitting a huge PR, you ride that wave of emotion and endorphins to more PRs, and having just being psyched up the rest of the day. So yeah, can you re-ask the question? I feel like I got myself lost there a little bit. I think I answered the question, but I just want to hear it one more time to make sure.
Yeah, it was just how your emotions come into play in steel bending.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's how it is after. In terms of before, like, I mean, I've kind of talked about it. It's just getting psyched up and being in the right headspace. That's also kind of why I like to poke fun at Adam and stuff like that when there's a comment made. I don't have anything against Adam. He's honestly a good guy for the most part, but it's fun to have an enemy. It's fun to have somebody that gets you fired up.
Super important. Absolutely.
It's absolutely true. And yeah, he's not necessarily a rival in bending, but it just became a fun thing to when he made that comment, that to take it to that next level. So I dip that way too, where I like to find an enemy and You know, I watched The Last Dance, and Michael Jordan was that way to a big extent. And I think that's a cool way to model myself. He used to pick somebody that did something. Even I think there was even one time with I'm blanking on the guy's name now, but it was in one of the finals appearances where some guy didn't even say anything wrong to him, but the guy went off for like 30 something points, and Michael said that this guy made some snarky comment, and he even told the media this just so he'd be even more fired up the next game. And then later on during this documentary, he goes, "Oh, that he never even said that. I just said that shit to get myself fired up." So I do this. Yeah, I've done the same thing to some extent. I mean, whether Adam meant that comment about me or not, it's not really relevant. The point was I wanted to get myself psyched up. I was in a little bit of a tough spot at that given time, and it helped me to finish off some steel that I was struggling with. So it's fun to have enemies, whether they're intentional or not. Randy Strawson probably never even thinks about me anymore, but I still use him as a mental way to get psyched up, and you know, hashtag fuck you Randy.
Exactly.
So I think that's a big part of my mental game too. You know, some people don't seem to like that. I don't know if people like that or hate it about me. You know, I know there's a lot more humble vendors out there than I am, but I like having that intensity. And as much as I wish I could be like Don and just, you know, take a couple of deep breaths and kill a PR, that's just not how I am, and I don't think I'll ever be that way. So I like to have whether it be an enemy or just a reason to get myself in the zone. Yeah, I think mental is a huge aspect for me.
Yeah, it's neat to see the different ways that the top benders access that power. You know, it's really interesting. So you kind of answered the next question, but it's describe a specific time emotions affected one of your steel bends or your performance during a steel bend.
Yeah, I think I already answered that to some extent, and it's happened both ways. I've definitely had bending sessions where I start out with a PR attempt and it goes awry for one reason or another, whether it be like snapping, which that's happened, or just a failure and feeling off. And then I get down and I have trouble getting myself back in the zone. I mean, that it definitely happens to me. I'd like to be honest. Then the opposite is true, like we just talked about. You know, that one workout where every bend was fuck you Adam, even though I really don't have anything super against Adam. It's just kind of fun to have an enemy. So sometimes when you're just in the zone and feeling psyched up, then it's nice to have that central point of focus, because ultimately when you're doing high level strength athletics, it's all about being as mentally present as possible. And when you start getting distracted and getting outside, you know, thinking about other things negatively or just tangentially, it's going to impact your performance. That was, again, going back to that Last Dance documentary. If no one else is, I'm sure a lot of people watch that, but you know, they talked a lot about how Michael was just the most present basketball player of all time. Like, he just was 100% present, 100% focused at every moment. And that's something I'm not perfect at, but it's something I'm aspiring to get better at. And I think as you get better at that, you'll be a better athlete in whatever you choose to do. Yeah.
That's a great comment about him being super composed. I remember the whole Conor McGregor Mayweather fight thing, and the comment that Conor had after he lost was, Mayweather's just super composed. That's all it is. He's just super focused, you know, in it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously with that one, it was, the interesting part was he had no boxing experience. So it's hard for him to be that focused in a sport where he had no experience. So I give McGregor props for at least being in that fight.
Well,
but yeah, you're right. I mean, that's something that a lot of the greats have in common, is they're just very laser focused when they're in the gym, or when they're in their element, whatever that element might be. Nothing else matters, period, end of story.
Yeah, of alternative sport athletes that tried boxing, I think he did one of the best performances. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does your mental attitude come into play during your steel bending? So how you think about yourself, how you think about what you're about to accomplish.
Well, I mean, part of this I've already talked about, but the one aspect I kind of touched on, but I think ties in really well here, is I am very arrogant when it comes to being in that moment. And whether you like it or hate it, that's just how I am. And that's what helps me get to where I want to be and what bends I want to accomplish. I think outside of when I'm in that moment, I am not nearly that way. which is so interesting. I think if people just watch my videos and haven't interacted with me in any other capacity, they'd be like, wow, that guy is really fucking cocky. And I used to get that a lot when I was younger too. Like everyone thought that about me when I was 16, 17, 18 in the bending community. Just then, even when I wasn't one of the best, or when I wasn't, one of the very best, I was still among the best benders. And I was very self-confident. And I think again, that's just how I am. And that's what helps me to be the best that I can be, because I think, again, it goes into what we talked about with presence and with self-confidence in relation to other athletes. Like a lot of the best just have that aura about them, and they know they're the best, and they walk in there to be the best. And frankly, if I'm bending stuff that you're not, I don't care if you think I'm too cocky. Yeah, but it helps me, and it drives me, and it helps me to bend stuff that I want to bend. So I think one of my biggest things is just going in there with that huge amount of self-confidence. And that's why I can get down on myself when a bend goes awry, because I'm just so focused and so determined that when something goes bad, I don't always know the healthiest way to cope with that. And that's something I'm still working on, but yeah.
So what are your thoughts leading up to a bend? What are you thinking about?
I mean, just finishing it. I'm thinking about that bend being under 2 inches and celebrating at the end. That's really it. Because again, at least again, that's in a perfect world. There's some bends where I get distracted, but that's not where I want to be. Ideally, when I go into that bend, I'm picturing that bend sub 2 inches. I'm picturing myself at the end, finish at the end of the bend celebrating, and that's all that matters.
Okay. Going into the next set of questions, research question 2. So this is going to be focused more on self-control.
Okay, pause real quick. I got to connect my laptop to the charger. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I thought I'd have enough battery, but I did not.
Okay. Yeah, we're just getting started here.
No worries.
So please describe for me in as much detail as possible how aggression comes into play during your steel bending.
I try to get as angry as I possibly can when I'm about to hit that bar. That's why you'll see me, doing the like rocking back and forth thing, something I learned from Aaron, breathing super heavy and the ammonia capsules, because I find it's most beneficial especially with regard to big PRs, and especially things like that no one's ever bent before, to be as just fired up and aggressive as possible, especially on that first hit. For me mentally, the first hit is everything, because if I hit that thing and it barely moves, my mental focus changes. As we've talked about before this, my focus is primary concern, and it is what's what I'm looking for. I mean, I guess it's everything to me, and it's everything to me finishing that bend. So I try to be as aggressive and hit into that first hit as hard as I can, because oftentimes it's a bar I've never done before. I've never done it that length before, and that sets the tone for the rest of the bend. And same thing for other sticking points. When I'm finished in that final crush phase, especially on one that's like really hard, like that 6-inch G8, for instance, I set the bar down, I refocus. Sometimes I'll take another hit of ammonia, or, take a drink of something caffeinated, and hit back into that bar again. So aggression is a huge part for me. And as we've talked about, I just can't fathom how Don and some of those other benders get such huge results without being aggressive, because for me, I treat it like a big power lift. And when I'm, going after, and it's different obviously because it's a longer exercise than like a deadlift, But when I was going after a huge deadlift, when I'm in powerlifting, I'm taking a huge shot of ammonia. I'm getting as psyched up as I possibly can, ripping that fucking thing off the floor. So I try to treat bends the same way. I'm getting as psyched up as I can, and I'm hitting that thing as hard as I fucking can. And then if I have to take a quick break, to wait off the endorphins or the aggression a little bit, then obviously I do that, and I usually have plenty of time within that 5 minutes anyway. Most of my bends are finished within 2 or 3. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Can you describe for me your goals when you approach a bend? I mean, obviously complete the bend.
I was going to say, can you clarify that? I don't know what you mean by goals besides obviously finish the bend. Are you talking about like incremental goals within the bending process?
I mean, there's obviously like small personal goals that you have within the major goal of completing the bend. Like, maybe you want your form a specific way. Maybe you want to finish it smoothly. Like, what type of goals do you have when you step up to a bend? In addition to obviously completing it.
I don't think I think about that too much. Again, like we've talked about before, my goals are just getting a really big first hit and trying to keep the bar hot. That's why even when I take my breaks, I try to make them relatively minimal, because as we know, when a bar cools off, it then becomes monumentally harder to get it back to moving. If, like, let's say you take a minute or 2 break within a bend. So my goal is basically to keep the bar moving. I guess that's a good answer to this. Keep the bar moving, keep the bar hot. Even when I take a break, I try to keep it relatively short to the extent that that's possible, depending on where I'm at mentally, physically, etc. at that point in the workout. Yeah, that's a big thing for me. That's why some of my workouts, you hear me say it's still moving, because I just like to see that and feel that it's, even if I'm at like a relative sticking point, that it's still moving and still making progress, because that means I'm closer to finishing the bend.
Yeah, that gives bending a really unique challenge that you have that incentive of getting back on it quick and shortening your break. Because with a lot of different strength sports or any type of lifting or anything, taking a break is really personal, but with bending, it's up to the bar kind of. Yeah, so that's kind of neat.
Yep.
Can you describe for me in as much detail as possible how you apply physical self-control during your bends?
Honestly, during my bends, I try to have as little self-control as possible to some extent, at least to the extent that the aggression kicks in. I guess self-control comes in making sure that my form stays tight, to try to minimize injuries, despite the problems I've been having. A lot of these are not even related to bending, but I address. So I think with self-control, it's about keeping the form tight, because if your form goes awry, especially when you're hitting on something that is, such a high level and takes close to 1,000 pounds to bend. I mean, I've done stuff that is calibrated over 1,000 pounds on the Kraling scale. It just takes a lot of intent to keep your form tight, because if it doesn't and you slip, there's always the potential for something serious injury to happen. I've been lucky that all my injuries have at least been minor and just something that I can come back from, but it's definitely important, and I'm lucky that I've been doing this long enough that the muscle memory is there. That's something I definitely caution newer benders, especially people that are relatively new but bending at a high level like Josh, to just be very, very cognizant of form, because when it hasn't yet become muscle memory, there is a much higher risk of you, being just a little bit off and tearing something off the bone.
So it sounds like there's like a razor's edge you're sort of standing on between absolute maximal effort and form breaking down.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, it's become more second nature. Like the form has become second nature enough, with regard to most bending styles, at least. Maybe not as much for like reverse, and like some certain areas of braced, but I've been doing this long enough. I had enough experience and trained with enough high level benders that my form has become relatively second nature, so I don't have to worry about that as much. But it's still something, again, I want to make sure of and want to at least keep in the back of my head that form is important. Just like for again, keep comparing this to high level powerlifting. Julius Maddox knows how to set up for a bench, but there's still always that chance that he's gonna misplace a foot or misplace his lats, and then all of a sudden he has a chance of tearing a pec off. So especially when you're doing stuff that no one else does, you have to keep that in the back of your mind of keeping form tight to avoid major injury.
And hopefully everybody loads your bar right.
What was that?
And hopefully everybody loads the bar correctly.
Oh yeah, it's true for the Maddox. Yeah, for sure.
Cannot believe that.
That was a catastrophe. I don't want to talk about that because I'd be so pissed if I were him.
I couldn't imagine.
I feel like
Yes,
I'm fairly sure he had that press in him, and then it just went bad once he had that misload. And that goes to like the mental aspect, because again, if he hadn't, he was in that perfect zone, and then a misload happens, something beyond his control. It's not his responsibility to go out there and count every plate, obviously, because that's what spotters are there for. And especially on ESPN, you'd think they'd have some intelligent spotters, but sometimes you don't control that. And his mental aspect clearly broke down. Like you can see on the next attempt when he goes after 800 again after the misload, he is not there. You can see it in his eyes. His head is not there. And I've been there. Like that happens in bending too, to some extent, where you have it like maybe you don't wrap it as tight as you want to, and then you go after to hit it and it doesn't move right, or you're not feeling quite right that day and it doesn't quite go right. And again, that's where my mental capacity breaks down too. So it's important.
Absolutely. It's fortunate he wasn't injured, and I think though it actually benefited him. Everybody's seen what happened with that, because he got a better team and he's doing so much better now.
True.
That's not going to happen next time.
Oh yeah.
So please describe for me in as much detail as possible anytime you felt nervous or anxious, either before or during a bend.
One thing I've been struggling with lately, which is interesting, is since I've been having and I haven't done too much double overhand bending, as we've talked about in the last couple of months, just because of injuries. But since the repeated snap problems I've had with stainless ware, even though it's just been stainless ware and that one freak piece of metal, I've noticed that I've been having more trouble mentally hitting at 100%, because even if it's a piece of steel I know is not going to snap, has never snapped me before, I just have that in the back of my head. So that's something I'm working on right now when I get back into double overhand bending, to just conquer that fear again. And it's been unfortunate because, again, all those things are just snapping beyond my control. But I think that's something that's caused me anxiety, and I have to find a different way to attack that and realize that it's I can't stay afraid. If you're talking about a specific instance, I don't know if I can think of like a very specific instance where I've had some level of anxiety in a bend. Yeah, I mean, just I guess what I just said. I mean, just coming back from all those multiple snaps, where I think I had a stretch where I had won a workout or won every other workout there for a few weeks. So just coming back from that's been a little bit difficult. But otherwise, I don't tend to have much anxiety, if at all, with regard to bending. And then when I do get anxious, it's more of an excitement prior to a big PR attempt, and that's something I just use and apply towards the aggression we've talked about. Yeah, I don't think I've suffered from that too much, besides the recent snap issues and getting back into it.
Okay. Well, that answered the next question, which is how your anxiety impacted your performance. Like you said, you couldn't hit 100% because of your snap issues. So can you describe for me in as much detail as possible how you personally judge yourself regarding your skill as a bender? Like what variables you use to judge yourself, what attributes?
So you're talking about my strength level, right? Like how I'm critiquing myself as a bender, or
what
can you
makes you
clarify?
a good bender? What attributes or what variables do you use to judge yourself at where you're at with bending?
I mean, with bending, I think if you're talking about relative to other people, I think it's easy to compare, because, well, to an extent, I guess, because obviously, shorter is harder, bigger is harder amongst the same type of steel. Obviously steel varies, which makes that a little bit more difficult. But in terms of how I judge myself or how I critique myself, like in relation to my prior self, which is how I try to focus. It's not always perfect, as I'm sure anyone could say, but with regard to like my prior self, what I'm trying to judge myself on is intensity, form, as we've talked about, ad nauseum in this interview, which I enjoy, but I'm just saying we talked about those two ad nauseum, but and then just speed of. I mean, bar speed is a thing in bending just as much as it is in powerlifting. I try to judge how fast the bar is moving versus a previous attempt of similar steel, if applicable, or just in general versus something of similar strength and past bends. And I can't think that there's anything else really. Does that answer the question? Like you're asking, I got a little confused with the question, so I want to make sure I'm on the right track here. It's my.
There's another way of looking at it. You're looking at some guy that's an up and coming bender. How are you judging him? What makes him a good bender or not a good bender? What variables are you using to judge someone that you're looking at that's up and coming?
Well, quickness of progression. So obviously, again, if we're talking about Josh again, his ability to have gone from, I don't remember where he started, somewhere around a bastard, a little bit less, to a 10.9 in a year is pretty damn impressive. And form progression, again, we talked about that. I vividly remember watching some of his initial videos where he was bending down here, and I'm like, oof, man, like if only you could learn some proper form, you'd progress quickly. And he really has. I haven't watched too much of his recent stuff, to be honest, just because I've been out into the bending world and trying to just stay in my own zone. But so I guess form progression is a big thing, and that would apply to me as well. Steel progression and attitude too, just how attitude changes in any sort of capacity. It doesn't necessarily have to be like an aggression attitude like mine, but it could be just how someone approaches and attacks a bar.
Okay. Can you describe for me any thoughts you have had during your bending that helped your performance?
Well, we've talked about this too. I mean, just having some sort of enemy or someone that I feel has negatively impacted my life because I'm someone that likes to harness negative aggression, for better or worse. That really helps me. Like I used it for a former boss once, when I left at my last job, because I really hated that guy. I still do. Yeah, I've used it for Adam. I've used it for Randy. I've used it in relation to Alex, even though the guy's never done anything wrong to me. So I think, just having, I've used it towards bars too. Like if this bar has beaten me twice, I'm not going to fucking let that thing beat me again. So just having something to help hone my focus, and keep me from drifting off into tangents or negative mindset in any sort of way really helps me in my performance.
You describe for me any thoughts that hindered your performance during a bend?
We've talked about this too. I mean, it was things like if the bar doesn't start the way I want it to, or if I feel like the wraps aren't quite as tight as I want them to be, which generally I try to avoid by, I'll even restart the wrapping entirely if I feel that necessary. But even sometimes when I get to the actual bend, it feels like the wraps have loosened or X, Y, or Z. Those are like anything that really takes my mind off of that central point of focus is going to be something that hinders me a bit. And that's something I'm again working on, so that if I have a bad start to a bend, I don't just give up on the bend. But I think really anything that detracts from that central point of focus can be something that hinders me. And usually it's like, something doesn't feel quite right. I tear my palm, something's hurting me. The first hit isn't quite what I want it to be. I get stuck earlier than I feel like I should be getting stuck at a bar or something like that, where I'll get a little distracted and it just kind of takes my focus off of, sorry, that flies around me, takes my focus off of the bend itself.
Okay. Can you describe for me a time you experienced thoughts of past failure or potential failure?
That usually has happened with bars that I've repeatedly failed on, and sometimes when I go back in to try that bar again, it gets in my head, and it's happened to me before, like with the 12.9 especially, where I'm just like, man, I really hope this time I can bend it. And my point of view is that once you get the word hope in there, or the word, I think I can do it, again, anything less than total confidence impedes my ability to bend that bar. So it can be difficult when you go back into a bar you failed on, especially like multiple times, and try to get yourself again back onto that complete focused mindset. Because sometimes I struggle with letting that past failure back into my head and getting it into self-doubt. And I've talked about this a couple of times so far in this podcast, but once I want to be so focused that that's picturing that bar completely bent is the only thing in my mind, and achieving that bar fully bent is the only thing on my mind. So, but I'm working on getting better at accepting past failures and moving them into future results.
Okay, good. That actually leads into the next question. Describe for me in as much detail as possible what you imagine or picture in your mind before your bends.
The bend being finished, and just like we talked about, getting the first hit as aggressive as possible, and then getting the bar finished. And sometimes, especially if it's a length that I've been focusing on, like if I'm focusing on a certain length of steel, I will picture each individual movement, because I generally know, the kink is going to get me to a certain degree. Then I'm going to have to switch to like more of my sweep technique. Then, when am I going to switch to interlacing my fingers? When am I going to pull off the double set of wraps? When am I going to switch to crush pads? I tend to have markers in my head of at a certain length and at a certain angle, I'm going to switch a technique, and I need to be there, which is why, sometimes I'll get stuck in a certain position because I haven't gotten that initial kink quite as far as I want it to be. So it has negative aspects too, because there can be certain sticking points, but generally I'm picturing where I need to be, how I need to finish, and where I need to be at each individual interval and each individual form position.
Okay, great. That answers the next question, which was describing what you imagine when you warm up. I imagine that's what you're going through when you're warming up.
Yeah, especially because I tend to warm up on the same length of stock as my first bend is going to be, give or take. So I'm picturing, where that progression needs to be, and focusing on making sure that all the tendons and muscles and stuff are warmed up before I move towards like a PR attempt too. It also plays in a big role. I think warming up is a huge part of bending. I'm going to talk about this a little bit on the Beyond the Bend, but warming up is a huge part of bending when you're putting that much load on tendons and smaller muscles, especially ones that are so we're non-sanguinous. I forget, there's a medical term, but like don't get blood as easily, which is the tendons, versus muscles that get blood flow to them a lot more easily. So focus making sure that every little piece, especially like elbows, are thoroughly warmed up prior to a max effort bend is huge for me.
Okay. Is there a timing in your mental imagery where your imagery changes during your bend? And this is actually going to go into a whole different subject here in a second.
If you're intending this question differently, then tell me. But the way I'm hearing this, for me, again, just goes back to if something's not going right, then I can get frustrated, and I that's where I tend to hit walls. Is if something goes awry and I get stuck at a point where I'm not quite sure where to go, which doesn't happen to me too often, but just like where that technique that should be getting me further is hit a sticking point, then sometimes I will just get stuck. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and that's really where mental imagery changes. Is just if there's something negative or my focus gets taken off, or my brain goes in a tangent, or I go, oh man, I'm going to fail this bend again. Once that thought enters my head, then I tend to struggle getting back to like a champion mindset.
Okay, so Have you seen the half-hour recap of Eddie Hall talking about his 500-kilogram deadlift?
Yes, but it's been a while. Remind me what you're talking about in
Okay,
particular.
so in that he sought out someone that could help him, a professional that could help him access different levels of adrenaline through fight or flight and the use of imagery. He started imagining pretty dark things, like the weight, him having to lift an assailant off of his child for the deadlift, and just dark things that had to bring him into fight or flight. So I want to know, how have you used your mental imagery to access fight or flight? Or like, what is the worst thing you imagine would happen if you failed a bend? What's the best thing you imagine would happen if you accomplished a bend? How are you accessing that level of mental intensity and fortitude through mental imagery with bending?
Yeah, I do remember that now. I just was trying to remember which video you were talking about, because I've watched a lot of Eddie Hall in the past. I have tried to use things like that where, I'm picturing myself, bending something that, bending like a car door, for instance, to, get my wife out of a car accident. I haven't played around with that too much. In full transparency, I tend to do better with like the villainization of somebody, and using this as a method of getting back at that person, so to speak. Um, but so I don't tend to. I haven't used that too much. Let's phrase it that way. I've played around with it a little bit, but I haven't done that a lot. So my experience is still relatively limited. It's something I want to try doing a little bit more, and I did find that really fascinating that Eddie actually used a psychotherapist to, like you said, picture that I think it was that his wife and son and were trapped under a car, and he had to deadlift it off of them, because that's everyone's example of like the untapped mind is a mom can lift a car off her kid, and yes, there's some truth to that. There's some real world examples of that. Usually the other side of the coin is that oftentimes in that she winds up with a fucking torn up back, or tears both hamstrings, whatever. I don't know the exact details, but there may be that physical capacity there, but there's also the severe ability for injury if someone goes way beyond their physical limits because they're tapping into a mental limit that exceeds their physical limits.
Absolutely.
But it's an interesting point of view, and it's something I want to play around with more, but I haven't really done too much.
Yeah, I think it's something you'll have to definitely dabble in easily, because like you said, the more mental power you put into it, the more you can injure yourself, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So can you describe for me in as much detail as possible what you learned from steel bending? That's a huge question.
I was going to say, that's such a wildly vague question. What I've learned from steel bending, I think the primary thing that I've learned from steel bending is a lesson that I still love. This was a Gaza quote, actually. At least someone else may have said it, who knows, but it's, "I accept no limits, therefore I have none." So that's one of my favorite quotes and one I like to live by, and I think steel bending really makes that applicable, because people, we keep bending things that people never thought were possible to bend before. And B, obviously a lot of people don't even have a concept that you can, normal people don't have a concept you can even bend these things, so I think just it's taught me that you shouldn't put limitations on yourself, because I truthfully believe that bigger stuff than me, Aaron, etc. are possible, which is why I believe that Gaza's claims are possible. And it's taught me that really you can do what you set your mind to. I mean, when I was 14 and started bending, I was I 5'10", 130 soaking wet, something so 5'9", 110, 120, a little scrawny kid that got made fun of a lot. I had failed out of football because I wasn't skilled, and didn't have any skills to catch the ball, and I was too small to block or catch or throw or really do anything with skill involved, and I was too small to be a lineman. So I failed out of football, but then I became one of the best benders of all time. So I think it's really just find something you love, put all your mind into it, and you can do it, whether it's something physical, whether it's something purely mental, whether it's some combination of the two. I guess everything physical has some mental aspect, but you know what I mean, like whether it's educational, etc., career-wise. If you put your mind to it and put your 110% in it, you can do it. So that's really what steel bending has taught me, is that it just takes dedication, it takes hard work, it takes overcoming injuries and overcoming setbacks, and sometimes I struggle with that mentally, but that's really what steel bending has taught me.
Awesome. Can you describe for me the environment that you find optimum for steel bending and why?
When I hear environment, I think of a couple of things. One, I think in Arizona, the thing I struggle with a lot is heat, because in summer I have to bend at like 6 o'clock in the fucking morning to avoid it being because it's 90 degrees by 8 o'clock in the summer here. So I have to get up at like 5 a.m. and I struggle to bend at night, to be honest. And it's also sometimes still super hot at night. Like it can be 70 degrees when the sun goes down, 80 degrees when the sun goes down. So one thing is temperature is big. I don't like it to be too wildly cold. I don't like it to be too wildly hot. Like ideally, I want it to be roughly 60 degrees, 60 to 70. The other thing to environment is having no distractions. Alex is unfortunately a distraction to me, which is my dog. So, when I hear him bark out here, sometimes that's why I like to bend on weekends, because he can be inside with his mom, because him barking does distract my mind frame. So really just an area with no distractions. It also can be good to work out with other people. Like obviously COVID has disallowed that, but I do miss when I could bend with Aaron or bend with someone else in the room, because I think it's nice to have someone else there to drive you and encourage you. But that's still a no distractions thing. Like I don't like being somewhere and having a bunch of shit going on, and I don't feel like I bend at the highest level. That can be a fun environment. Like Aaron used to have like hangouts and stuff, and like especially after contests we used to hang out and drink and fuck around and bend and stuff like that, and that was always fun, but it's not conducive to hitting the most PRs possible, in my opinion, in my experience. I like to be generally alone in my garage, metal or some type of music that encourages me, playing metal rap depending on how I'm feeling that day, and centrally focused on getting that next bend done.
It's actually, you brought up a topic I wanted to talk about here about music choice. I've noticed that sometimes you play music that has a beat like metal that gets you pumped up based on the rhythm and the sound of the music, and sometimes it's the lyrics, and you're going along with the lyrics that are like, I'm, badass, I'm going to do this, blah, 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 those type of lyrics.
Yeah.
And what mood puts you, why do you want to use the metal sometimes? Why do you want to use the lyrics sometimes? What's that about?
Honestly, it just depends on how I'm feeling that day. Like, it just depends on what seems to be working for me. Sometimes when I'm more in that like villainization mindset, I like the rap music, because I get like the Eminem on when he's talking shit about Machine Gun Kelly, and like the Kill Shots on, or stuff like that. Versus sometimes I don't have that mind frame, and metal or something more upbeat will work better. So I just kind of play around with it, and during warm-ups and stuff, see what seems to be motivating me the most and kicking me into high gear the most, and then I go into it with that. So it just depends on how I'm feeling that day. It's the most honest answer.
Okay, cool. So when you're going up to a bend you've never done before, what can you describe for me your thoughts and emotions when you decide you're going to commit to bending that damn bar? It's something you've never done before.
Well, I'm always committing to bending that damn bar. So I think it just goes back to my general emotion when going into any PR attempt, is just being, again, centrally focused, psyched up, aggressive, hitting the bar as hard as I can. For me, like the area where I tend to struggle more is if it's a piece of or a type of steel I've never bent before, whether it be a different make or a different size I've never tried. Like I have an easier time cutting a 1/2 inch off and going at it again than I do going up 32nd of an inch, for instance, or 64th of an inch even. yeah, for me, like picturing it when I've bent to 6.5 of something, going into the 6, I'm just like, well, it's going to be a little harder on the crush. Let's fucking go. Versus a bar that I've never had before. Again, I don't have any knowledge of what that's going to be. I don't know where it's going to calibrate at. I don't know how hard it's going to be. If there's going to be certain sticking points, I tend to base it on obviously the type of steel. And I know if it's cold rolled, it's going to have it's going to have an easier crush, and I'm going to have to get super psyched for the kink because that's where I'm going to more likely fail the bend. And stainless is the opposite way. Generally, the kink is going to be easier, and I'm going to have to save some energy for the crush when it gets super springy and super tough. So I guess that's kind of goes to that. I have to base it around what the type of steel is. If it's something I've done before, but I'm just cutting it shorter, or using different pads, like using a smaller wrap, which I do sometimes, but I don't do too much. Team Fat Pad, and yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, bigger fear of the unknown rather than the known metal just going shorter, just a progression on something known. That makes
exactly.
A lot of sense. So can you describe for me in as much detail as possible how confidence plays a role in your bending?
I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but when I go in with I try to go in with as much confidence as possible. As we've talked about, I'm pretty arrogant when I go into a bend, and I can be in the middle of a bend, just because that's what helps me be in that right mindset. But if something goes awry, that's where I tend to struggle, and that's what I'm still trying to get better at. And that's one of the downfalls of my style of bending. That's, I think, Don and a couple of people have talked about. In some capacity, maybe they haven't talked about it in this capacity, but when you're going in and your sole motivator is negative aggression or just aggression in general, me personally, if something goes awry, I tend to or I can get distracted. That's why I'd love to be like Don and just take a deep breath and bend and have it be a maximal effort thing, but I just don't think I'll ever be that way. But for me, it's a confidence is a huge portion of how I bend, and that's why I try to go in with the firm belief that I'm the best and finish with the firm belief that I'm the best.
We've talked a lot about PR and big bends. So can you explain to me in as much detail as possible how you experienced your standard bends? Is there a different mental attitude for your training bends that you're going to accomplish and you're doing mainly to keep your strength and to continue training?
So I tend to be like Don. Like I don't do a ton of volume and rebending things. I have done a little bit in the past just because I'm off of my peak. But when I'm at peak performance, barring these injuries, I don't tend to go backwards or look back and do other bends. There's enough types of steel out there, and enough ability to change it up to create different PRs that I don't tend to do a lot of volume. So I guess that would apply for like warm-ups to some extent. For warm-ups, I'm just focusing on, like we talked about before, getting blood in the muscles and tendons, making sure the form is tight, making sure I'm progressing at a normal pace, and going into the bend, the PR bend with the right attitude and the right mental space, right amount of confidence. I've done some volume work, and I guess there's definitely a different aspect with it because I don't go into it with as much intensity. I'm not doing ammonia with it. I'm not doing as much caffeine. Usually just have a cup of coffee or sip on an energy drink, whatever, when I have done volume in the past, but it's not something I do a ton of. I tend to be more of Don's mind frame that there's always the ability to hit a PR, and if I don't hit the PR, then I'm just doing ISOs on where I fail at, and then I find out that's where my sticking point is for that certain bar, and then I'm doing more isometrics or doing some different PR attempt to try to get myself past that sticking point, especially if that's a huge goal bar of mine. Otherwise, I'll just kind of circle around and maybe try it again another month or two, or a couple weeks or two, whatever.
That's cool. Every workout has a motivation for, an increased level. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Level up every time. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So describe for me in as much detail as possible how you handle distracting thoughts and distractions in the gym before your bends.
Like I said, it's something I'm still getting better at to this day, and I think, you know, when I get better at that, or as I get better at that, it will help me to be even better on my high level bends. But how I tend to handle distractions is just get myself back to focus as quickly as possible, and as in whatever way I can as possible. So if something distracting happens, I don't know, wife needs something inside, or whatever. I'm trying to think of what like a distraction would be besides just like having a bad attempt on something. But I just try to find a song that gets me back in that groove, get psyched up for the next bend, and go on about my business.
Okay. So out of thoughts and emotions and sensations during bending, what screams at you the loudest? What stands out the most? If you were to use a word that describes a thought, emotion, or sensation that's involved with bending, what would it be?
One word?
Yeah, it can be one word or one sentence, one thought.
Anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any expansion on that?
I just try to use bending as my my outlet. That's always been how I've treated it, and it works well for that. I mean, I'm as I've talked about before on podcasts, I'm somebody that struggles with depression, anxiety, etc. I have it a lot in my life. So I think bending has become a really good outlet for me to get out the negative emotions, which is partially why I use that like negative aggression mindset, because for me, I have a lot of that stuff inside my head, unfortunately, and bending has become a great way of getting that out, and healthily, versus I don't know, throwing shit, whatever else
That's great.
people do negatively, drinking. That I used to be an alcoholic, so it's just been a good healthy way of dealing with other shit in my life.
Okay. So when you step out of the gym, you step in, say you've had a lot of shit going on, everything's messed up. You step out, how you feeling?
Well, good. I mean, that's the goal. Obviously, sometimes it goes the opposite way. If I have a bad session, that's kind of where I have to draw that fine line. Like it's like the razor's edge, what you talked about in a different way, where I have to not let the negative stuff impact me negatively. I have to try to focus it on bending, and rather than going to the gym being like, oh man, this didn't go well at work, I'm struggling with this in my personal life, X, Y, or Z, and then go, well, hopefully bending will help me get over it. Instead, I have to go, hey, this has been bad, let's get fired up and have a great bending session, and then everything will be gravy after that. So yeah, generally after a great bending session, I walk out into the world. If I have a bad bending session, that's where I have to kind of rein myself back in and be like, okay, it's just bending, like it's not the end of the world. You just have to take a step back and attack it again next week, or whenever the next workout's planned for.
Okay.
So it goes both ways, but I'm getting better at just making it a positive negative experience.
Yeah.
Or a positive experience of getting out negativity. That's a better phrasing of it.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're in the zone, when you're bending, what are you aware of external to you and the bend? Stuff around you. Are you aware of anything?
What we've talked about, I try not to be. Yeah, the only I try to have a clear space around me, so I don't have to be aware of I don't know, tripping or whatever of any of my surroundings, and then I just try to focus as much on bending and finishing that bar as I can. Really, the only things I want to focus on outside, well, they're still inside of the bend. Like I just want to have a focus of when I'm taking the fat pads, the double wraps off, when and where my crush pads are, and when I'm going to throw those on, just stuff like that. But outside of the bend, I try to make it 0, because that's how I get the best results.
Okay. Can you describe to me a time when something external to you distracted you from your bending performance, hindered it? Some sort of external distraction affected you?
I'm not great with specific examples. Let me see if I can think of something.
Yeah, you mentioned a few internal distractions.
Yeah, I mean, internal distractions happen when like I've talked about, when a bend goes awry. And I've had that happen. But in terms of external distractions, like something specific, I can't really. I mean, there's been a couple of times when, you know, my wife was at work or something, and then she messaged me because something happened. I think there was once or twice when she had to come home from work early or whatever because something happened at work, and that became a distraction. Um, I just can't think of any like super specifics, but again, if there's been times where I've had to stop a workout because of external, it's happened once or twice, or because my mind has turned negative because I had a failure or two, or usually it's 3 or 4, but that happens to the best of us. And yeah, generally I just try to, assuming it's something I can come back from, just refocus and get back on time, on track. But I can't think of anything like super specific example wise.
Okay, we're actually going to be going into this little section on failure here in just a second. So, describe for me in as much detail as possible your experience after failing a bend and what you go through in preparation of a reattempt.
I don't generally reattempt the same bend in the same workout, if that's where that question is headed. I have a couple of times, and I have actually conquered that bend, which was a really good feeling. Like there, I can remember when I did the Fantastic Bastard the first time, which is 5/16 by 4. The first time I hit it in that workout, I got it to like 2 1/8 or 2 1/16. It was just something like silly close, but I just couldn't quite get over the top. I couldn't fucking finish it. And then I stepped away, and this happened with actually the 6-inch 10.9 bolt too. Is a pretty similar story. Actually, that was one where I finished it out to the time limit. I can do that story too. The first time, then finished the second time. But the Fantastic, I just remember I was like, man, I'm so goddamn close. And I just took a break. I sat down for like 5 or 10 minutes, let myself cool off, got some more caffeine in and hydrated. And I was like, you know what? I was just so damn close. I'm just gonna go after this again and just get really, really angry. And so I did. I was just like, I'm not gonna fail this thing again. And I think I got it in like 3 minutes. Like I did it with way more time than I needed to the second time because I just attacked it with, you know, probably 5 times the intensity. The first time even though it was a huge PR attempt for me because I'd never done the Fantastic before, obviously.
Was that 5/16 round by 4?
Yeah, 5/16 round by 4.
That short stuff is tough.
It is tough, and that's the hard thing.
Contest against John, another one of guys you're helping, and that was fun going head to head with him on the short 1/4 inch because man, it gets crazy to hold on to when you get sub 4 inch.
Yeah, it's wild. I haven't really messed with too much sub 4. Like 4 is generally the shortest I've done. I can't think if I'm sure I've done like 3.5 of something, but it's not generally something I've messed with, especially recently. I don't know if I even have on this foray back into bending. But it's
3 1/4, and through that I mean I tried to do a 3, and it's like, what am I doing here?
You can't even grab the steel at that point. It's just so awkward, and you have to tailor your wraps to it too, because if you have too long wraps, it just feels like you're pushing on pad. Yeah, that was one where I just got really, really intense and angry and went back and attacked it again. Kind of similar thing, but a little bit different with the 6-inch 10.9 bolt. The first time I tried it, I tried to incorporate something that I see Alex do, which is he has like a second set of pads that are more designed for crush. They're like a little shorter, a little denser, and he'll slide the first wrap off, put the next one on, and then use that towards crushing. And I tried to incorporate that on the 6-inch 10.9. It just felt awkward, and I couldn't quite get it right. And then I put the pad back on and did it my way, and finished it outside of 5. And I was like, well, fuck, I should have just not deviated from myself. I just thought it was a cool idea and thought it would be different, might help me at a sticking point. So I think I had failed the 6-inch 10.9 before the previous workout, or 2 workouts before anyway. So I went back to it, and I was just like, well, if I just do my thing again and again, like the Fantastic, just get twice as angry. And I did, and finished that thing again. I think it was like 3.5 or 4 minutes. It was well within the time frame, versus the last one took me like 7 because I was fucking around with the technique I wasn't experienced with. So that was kind of a learning lesson for me too. Just, it's nice to try new things, and they can be helpful, but it's better to do that on like a volume type bend or a warm up type bend first, rather than trying to incorporate it initially into a huge PR attempt, and you might fumble with it and not quite know how to execute. And then you fuck up and realize you should have done what you were comfortable with. So.
Okay. What's your anxiety like when you hit a bar and it doesn't go the way you want it to? Anxiety.
That depends. I mean, if it's something I've never really done before, like what happened with the when I attempted the chain of all hexes a while back, I didn't really have a basis for where that bar was going to fall. So I was kind of happy that I'd moved it at all and just used that as a learning lesson of, you know, hey, I need to continue to work on my kink and use this as an ISO bar. And hey, at least something that no one's ever even done before, I was able to move a bit. But if it's something that, like, let's say for the 12.9 bolts, my most recent attempt, the kink didn't move, like the initial kink didn't move as far as I wanted it to. And I still came back from it and got pretty close to finishing it. I think I finished that one at like 2.5, 2 3/4, something like that, and just couldn't quite get the crush. But it does kind of get to me. I'm like, you know, damn it, this is something I failed before. Am I going to fail it again? And I have to just kind of, you know, spin that around and be like, no. I have to kind of tell myself no. And like we've talked about it, you know, again ad nauseum to some extent. I'm getting better at that, but it's something I still struggle with, and I think it can be difficult if it's, especially if it's a repeat failure bend. If it's something I've never tried before, I just try to use that as a lesson. Like, okay, well, this was harder than I thought it was. Let me try something different and make sure I'm not just having an off day. And I try to get a baseline afterward. Just like if I'm failing a bar I've never tried before, well, maybe that chain of all hexes is in the 800-pound range. I don't even know, because I don't even know if that bar has been calibrated at any batch. And obviously cold rolled varies more than pretty much any other type of steel in percentages. So I don't know if that was just something that's, maybe it cals at 850 or 900 pounds. I don't fucking know. And maybe then I just try to find something else and have a baseline. So then I go, okay, well, was I feeling off and I need to try the chain of all hexes again next workout? Or is that just a bar that's beyond my capacity for right now? And I just need to focus on, you know, hitting that isometrically and trying other bars to bridge that gap. So honestly, it depends on the, you know, whether it's a repeat fail bend or a new bar to me altogether.
Okay. So you failed the bar several times. You finally complete the bend. What are your thoughts and emotions?
Oh man, I'm ecstatic. I mean, you can see it on my face. And if you watch the 6-inch G8 bend, that was, I'd failed that twice, I think, before. And I thought, I was worried I was going to fail it again. If I remember right, I was at like 2 1/8 or 2 1/4 with like 30 seconds left on my 5-minute clock. And I was like, fuck. And so I took a big old shot of ammonia. Like, I was thinking that's my second one of the bend. And I was like, fuck this. I'm not gonna fail this again. And then I felt it move and I was like, fuck, yes. And so, you know, I finish it, I measure it and confirm that it was inside 2. And I'm just ecstatic. I'm over the moon. So that's generally what happens if I, you know, get a bar that I failed on a couple of times before, or at least once before. It's a really nice feeling to conquer something that has conquered you in the past, regardless of your level. I think that's just an awesome accomplishment. And I love that about steel bending, that you can have something that stuck on you before and go back and finish it, and, you know, or do one from stray, that same bar, and have that overcoming feeling.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I failed, I don't know, a dozen times at the red nail before I finally got the form right and then got it. And that's awesome. I was ecstatic. I was running around high for the rest of the day. That was way cool.
Especially when it's a big like baseline bar like that. I feel like that's a huge thing, because everyone talks about their first red. Like, everyone remembers their first red, their first bastard. I remember mine of each, even to this day. And I think that's a big thing when you failed in that bar multiple times. And it's one of those like I said, baseline bends or major goal bends that everyone has on their bucket list. I think it's a huge feeling to finally get that lift that off your shoulders, kind of thing.
Okay, so these next set of questions actually go outside of psychology, and they're more just about safety to help validate and legitimate the activity we're talking about here, basically. So it's what steps do advanced level benders describe taking an effort to increase the safety of their bending. So describe for me in as much detail as possible any steps you take to increase safety and reduce the risk of injury in bending.
Warming up. My biggest thing is warming up well and making sure that I'm ready to hit that maximum level bar. Because if you're not well warmed up, if you're not feeling great, then you're not going to make it. And the other thing is just assessing my my physical and mental capacities of the day. So I've I struggle with having a scheduled workout plan, because sometimes on that day where bending is scheduled, I didn't sleep well the night before, or um, I didn't, whatever, I'm not feeling great, stomach's not feeling great, X, Y, or Z that might be off. I tend to, or what I prefer to do and what I should do is just push that workout a day or two. Because I think, especially if you're doing high level bends, if you're not feeling 100%, and you're trying to bend at 100%, you're more likely to get injured. So those are my big things. And then again, like I kind of talked about before in this interview, that my form has become pretty second nature. For other high level benders, especially if they're newer, I would encourage people to focus a lot on form and make sure that nothing is off in how you're hitting it, how you're hitting the bar. I think that's something that people should focus on, and I still do to a big extent, but it's just become second nature enough that I don't have to consciously focus on it. It's more of a subconscious thing, and I can notice if something's feeling a little off, and then either step down, try a different style, go with a different set of goals for the day, etc., depending on how I'm feeling, because I prefer to not push myself towards injury. I'd rather just switch to double underhand or brace or reverse, or lighter pads, whatever, if I'm not feeling up to tackling the crazy bar I had in mind for that day.
Okay. Can you describe for me a specific time you experienced injury during a bend?
Most of my injuries during bend, like I told you earlier, unfortunately, a lot of my injuries in the last 6 months have been non-bending related or tangentially related to bending. So usually when I injure myself during a bend, it's like tearing my palm, for instance, which then I just try to work around as best as I can, and then just quit the workout if it's something that is going to keep getting worse, or if it's something that the pain level is prohibiting me or inhibiting me from hitting the bar at a maximum capacity. Or sometimes I'll just super glue it back together and then go for the next bend if the pain level's not bad. It's just if it's just bleeding. So I've been fortunate that I haven't had too many injuries mid bend, but if I do get one, obviously I'm just taking the day off. Like, there's no point in pushing yourself through an injury. Just take the day and live to fight another day rather than turning a strain into a tear. It's always been my point of view. That's probably why I've been fortunate to not have any major injuries, knock on wood.
Okay. Do you assess, when stepping up to a new bar, do you assess the bar with regard to thoughts of potential risk or potential injury? We talked about the big stainless a little bit. Obviously, that would be when you'd be scared to try because of the risk of injury on that.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously on a new bar, and that's why I limit myself in types of steel. I don't try anything outside of the norm because I don't want to risk injury or it snapping at my throat. So I don't generally assess risk of injury on a new bar because, again, I'm smart about it. I do the best I can to avoid injury. But I mean, realistically speaking, injury is always a part of the sport. It's always a part of strength athletics. I mean, if you're a strongman fan, you look at Rob Tierney, who went for a 5-pound PR on a log press and tore his tricep. Nothing really looked that off about that technique wise. It's just sometimes you load slightly wrong when you're going for a PR. Something you aren't hitting quite right, whatever the case might be. And an injury happens. There's always a chance of that. I just try to live with that in that acceptance. I mean, accepting that injuries are a part of the game, and unfortunately, setbacks are going to happen. But I don't go into a bend fearing injury, because then you're just not going to finish the bend. I mean, at least from my perspective.
Okay. You touched on this some, but what's your internal dialogue like? What's your self-talk like when you're going up to bend?
I mean, it tends to just revolve around like the aggression we've talked about. I tend to just say like, hey, we're gonna get this bend. Like, let's do it. Without getting into all the specifics and all the expletives I use self-talk wise. It's just like, I mean, it just sometimes it revolves around the villainization of someone or
There's a
something.
study that says cursing while you grip improves your dyno 5%. You
What was
know,
that?
there's a study out there. It shows that people that curse while they're squeezing a dyno, grip goes up like 5%. There's something to aggression and expletives. There's something to it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So that tends to be what I do. You know, sometimes, some days it's villainization of somebody. Some days it's just general anger or general, you know, getting myself hyped up and aggressive towards the bar. But I don't think I have like a set self dialogue for every band, or even the same day. I don't generally have a same self dialogue. It's just like, let's get after it. Let's go, in some capacity around that.
Do you have anything to say about, now these last two questions are actually about you personally. Do you have anything to say about your stare you do right before you go into your bend? You tend to lean over, you stare right before you do a big bend.
That's something I learned from Aaron. It's just an intensity thing. Like Aaron used to always do that whole like rocking back and forth thing, you know, where you kind of pump it and then just get your eyes real big. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's just something that helps me get in the zone and get me focused. And I think I'm sure it just stems back from watching Aaron kill Big Steel with the same kind of shit. I don't know if there's anything actually biological or anything else about it, but it's just psychological and getting myself in the right frame of mind to be aggressive and hit that bar. So that's all there really is to it. I don't picture anything particular. It's not, there's no intention behind it besides just being focused and having my mind on killing that bar.
Yeah, I've tried using that and I feel like it ramps me up a little bit for sure. Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned this a couple times, that your wife motivated you to get back into bending. She likes to watch you bend. You've mentioned that in videos before. And back when you were young, you bent for your girlfriend, bent horseshoes into hearts for your girlfriend, bent for the neighbor girl. What's the deal with bending for a woman?
I don't know.
Behind that?
What was that?
What's the motivation behind that? Bending for a woman?
Well, I mean, I think when I was younger, I mean, the heart thing was just kind of a cool thing because obviously girls have no concept of bending horseshoes. So they thought, I thought it was really cool. And I had a girlfriend that called me Hulk when I was like 15 because I bent her a horseshoe. But that was just like a cool way to impress girls in high school, I think, to some extent. Now it's just that, it's the woman I love. I love bending too. So and she likes watching me bend. So I just do it sometimes with that in mind. But it's not as if it's not as if she is the central point of focus on bending, as much as I love her in the whole world, but it's just something I've mentioned and throw out there because she likes it and makes her happy. And happy wife, happy spouse, happy house. That's what she says because I matter too. But happy wife, happy life. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's definitely a good reason to be motivated for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else you want to say about the mental aspects of steel bending? Anybody that you think would be a good person to have on to do this interview? And anything else you want to plug?
I mean, I haven't watched a ton of your videos. Obviously, like Don or Josh are both good people. If you haven't had either of them, I'd love to hear. I think Don's touched on it a little bit on the Beyond the Bend podcast, like what he goes through when he just takes his quick breath and just goes into a bend. But I'd love to hear where his mind frame is because he's the exact opposite from me in a lot of capacities. And I don't know much about Josh, and he's obviously gained a lot in the last year. I have to assume a lot of that's from his strength background. As I think I've mentioned on podcasts before, like Aaron was a thrower and Josh seems to be a high level thrower too. So there's got to be something to that, like quick twitch fiber from throwing and like the muscle built from that transfers over to bending. I'm really curious if Josh can give any insight to that, if he's ever given thought to that is, which probably has. So those are two that I'd really love to see. And if you want to get into like the snapping arena, like Dan Dring is just someone that seems to have a really good mental focus on snapping. And I'd be curious to hear what goes through his head, even though I don't do snapping, just it's still, he's in the same arena, and I'd like to hear how his psyche works. Ruben Hughes obviously is a monster in everything braced and snapping. So I think he would be a great one to talk to. Jan is, I mean, I've talked about Jan too. I know he's dealing with an injury right now. I think he's supposed to be back into bending somewhat soon, but he would be a good one to talk to about mental aspects, because I've talked to him a little bit, and he's a very high level intelligence bender in terms of how he approaches it. So I'd be curious to hear his input. In terms of anything else, well, I mean, the Bending Academy is kind of, I'm trying to get everything, like, I'm trying to figure out how to best structure it. So it's taking the back burner right now because of work and how I've been. So I've been trying to get content out to you guys that are with me. So I appreciate you guys being patient, but I'd love to get more people in the Bending Academy to get more content and have I guess the motivation to make more content. I hate that, kind of sounds shitty to you. I'm sorry if that sounds that way, but like I want to make more content, and right now it hasn't been a high enough priority because of my career, which has been a little more of a focus, and because I've been off on bending.
I had bent almost nothing. I had bent almost nothing when I started, and I think in 3 months I had bent the red nail. So, and that's what I told you my goal was. So I mean, that's pretty awesome. I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have made some huge progression. So I think I'd love to see more people join up. I'm really curious. Like, I got to make this comment, but I love Jed dearly because he's a really intelligent person. But I am very curious if anyone would like an ebook from a bender who's actually bent big steel, because I just, as much as Jed is a very nice guy and very intelligent and everything grip, he really hasn't done much bending, but everyone still turns to that ebook. Everyone still looks at that as a primary source of bending. So I'm curious if anyone would be interested in an ebook from me. If you are, please let me know, because I could definitely write that, and I think it would have a lot of great content in it. If someone wants that as like a one-time fee rather than joining the Bending Academy and paying a monthly fee, because it is monthly. But either way, I'd love to have more people to coach and to teach and tutor, because it's really fun for me, and I love doing it, and I think I have a lot of expertise to pass along. So
the other thing is I never got hurt that whole time. In those 3 months that I went from never bending to bending the red nail, I never got hurt, and it was following your advice, and that's huge.
That's excellent. Well, good. I'm glad, and yeah, I've been really impressed with you and John, a few other people, and the progression they've made under my bending. Mike had some tremendous progression too prior to him drifting off into like snapping and brace that he's doing now. But his double overhand made huge gains under me too. So yeah, if people are interested in being trained, let me know. The Bending Academy, I definitely want to make more content and want to have more people in it so we can get a bigger platform. My goal is to take it to Patreon so that they can have better content and better access to content. It's just right now with their fees, it's not really worth it with a couple of people. So yeah, I mean, if you guys are interested, hit me up. If you guys have suggestions for ebooks or other ways to go about things, hit me up. I might release a couple of the training videos, like 1 or 2, just to give some examples of what the content is like and see what people are interested in. But I think it's a really great platform, and I think there's enough grip guys that do personal training that I'd love to see the bending personal training take off. So if anyone's interested, reach out, let me know. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's been great for my progression, that's for sure. So
yeah.
Do you have any questions for us, Couch Potato Strong, or anything else you want to say before we take off?
I'm just curious. I mean, I didn't realize this was actually for I guess the psychological impact, because I don't know how many of your interviews I've watched before, to be honest. Like, how is this going into a research pool? How are you guys formulating your research?
Well, this is the first scientific interview that I've done for our podcast.
Oh, okay.
Essentially what you do is you do a group of them. So you need to do probably at least 10. And then you'll look for themes. So, things that you talked about that everybody else also talked about. And you find those themes, and then you make just a write-up of what the thematic experience is psychologically with steel bending. And once you have a thematic experience written up on the psychology of steel bending, it basically gets the ball rolling for other scientists to build off of that study and start the scientific validation of steel bending.
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then I'm definitely intrigued to see who you interview next. I think the ones I gave you are great suggestions. With that in mind, I'm trying to think of who else would be a good suggestion for this. I don't know. I'll think about it and I'll get back to you because I'm sure there's other people I'll think of, but right now my head is not working. It's also getting crazy hot out here for February in Arizona.
Yeah, usually people are pretty wiped out after these interviews. You've never probably thought about bending this much.
Yeah, not in this capacity at least. Let's phrase it that way. I've thought about bending way more than this, but not in this aspect and for this amount of time. So it's been an interesting interview, and I've really enjoyed it. But yeah, I'll have to think about who else I'd suggest, and I'm very curious to see how this takes you guys. Do you have a background in psychology, or is this more for?
On my doctorate degree, my PhD was very similar to this interview we just did here, except it was on power breaking with martial artists.
Oh,
so I wanted to know the psychological experience of power breaking. I've done a lot of power breaking, and in a way, it's kind of like kinking a big bolt. I mean, you have to get amped up, and it's either going to move or it's not. That brick is either going to break or it's not, and you put everything into it, and there's a big risk that you're going to get hurt when you smash it. It's just the way it is. They're very similar.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know too much about that outside of watching movies and stuff. But that's really interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed this, and yeah, if you ever want me on for a follow-up, obviously let me know.
Absolutely. I appreciate you being on. This was awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Have a good rest of your day.
You enjoy the rest of your day too.